Tayén's courage speaks louder than any speech. And Silas's silence says even more. If a stranger collapsed before you unconscious, caught between life and death, and that person belonged to a people once labeled as your nation's enemy, what would you do? Walk away to avoid trouble? Or kneel down, even if you knew that act might change your entire life, forever? On a scorching July afternoon in 1869, the land north of Tucson burned red and dry like an open wound. The wind swept through cacti groves, carrying dust and the invisible sobs of souls lost to war, hunger, and prejudice. Amid this harsh backdrop, Silas Whitmore, a widower living with his 2 children in an old wooden cabin, was walking home from the hills. He hadn't expected to find anything beyond a few sprigs of wormwood and sage, the herbs he usually brewed into tea when his daughter had a fever. The death of Margaret, his wife, from pneumonia 3 years earlier, remained an unstitched gash. Since then, Silas had lived quietly with no faith, no wedding ring, and nearly no words left for God. The afternoon wind tugged at his faded white shirt, leaving the scent of dry sweat and earth on his skin. The sky was tinted gray-yellow, as if even the heavens were weary of this lonely place. Silas placed his steps firmly through the brush, his thoughts turning to dinner, the potato he dug up this morning, the salt nearly gone. But while his mind was busy with the small matters of the living, fate was already weaving a story far greater than anything he'd imagined. A groan. Faint, not sustained. Just a sound barely caught by the wind, easily mistaken for a forest creature or brittle leaves? But Silas, who had heard men dying in war, knew that sound too well. He stopped. There it was again, weaker. His hand instinctively gripped the handle of the knife at his waist. Survival instinct outweighed compassion for now. He brushed aside the undergrowth, eyes scanning the terrain. Then he saw her. A body, nearly still, lying across rock and soil. Sunset light streamed through the branches, casting deep gold onto her skin, a clear bronze brown. Apache. He knew the moment he saw her. She wore a torn, blood-crusted deerskin dress. Her black hair was matted with dust. A small tattoo, a spiral with 3 curved lines, marked her right cheek. A bone charm hung from her neck, swaying gently with breath so faint they were almost gone. Something split inside Silas. One side echoed the voices of the town, "Stay away from the Redskins. They slaughtered the James family. It's not your business." But the other side saw a body dissolving into the dirt, saw fever, saw pain, saw a human being. He knelt. One trembling hand lifted her head, the other brought his water flask to her lips. She didn't awaken. But a few drops clung to her lips, a sign of life still clinging on. "Damn it," he muttered. "God. I don't need another burden." And yet, his arms wrapped around her back, lifting her as if cradling his own past, one of blood, grief, and regret. She was terrifyingly light, as if the slightest breeze could carry her away if he loosened his grip. Step by steady step, he returned to the old trail, not looking back, not speaking even to himself. When Silas pushed open the creaky cabin door, Clara, his curly-haired daughter with eyes wide as a cat's, was kneading bread dough. She looked up, her eyes widening as she saw the stranger in her father's arms. "Daddy, who is she?" Silas didn't answer. He laid the woman on the small bed near the stove, the same one his wife had once used. He slipped off his dusty boots, hung his straw hat on the wall hook, and finally said, in a voice dry but heavy, "She's someone who needs to live." And in that very moment, none of them in that little cabin knew that their lives had just turned onto a path with no return. In the flickering lamplight of the kitchen, Silas's wooden house had never felt more uncertain. These walls, weathered by countless winters and scorching summers, now enclosed a secret too dangerous for the world outside. Silas Whitmore, a war veteran, a quiet widower, was sheltering an Apache woman. Clara stood frozen by the door, her hands still dusted in flour, staring at the sleeping woman. In her young eyes there was no hatred, only fear and curiosity. But Silas saw more than a wounded woman. He saw war, death, generational hatred. And more than anything, he saw himself, years ago, lying unconscious among dead friends on the battlefield of Gettysburg, blood pooling beneath a horse's hooves. He neatly folded a blanket, soaked a clean cloth in warm water, and gently placed it on her forehead. The wound on her lower abdomen had begun to swell, signs of infection. Sweat beaded on her brow despite the cooling air. Within minutes, Silas used every herb he had: sage, wormwood, a little white liquor as antiseptic. Everything Margaret had taught him, that woman who once loved both land and leaf, who died too early to see the grass grow back after their arguments. "Do you think she's dangerous, Daddy?" Clara asked, voice trembling. Silas didn't turn, but he understood the question wasn't just about the stranger. It was a child's question about right and wrong, about love and fear, about forgiveness and caution. "Not everyone who wears a different color is the enemy," he replied, still pressing the damp cloth. "But they said she kills." He looked up, not angry, not tired, just the gaze of someone who had seen too much to trust what they said. "They also said white men were gods. And you know that's not true." Clara stayed quiet. She returned to kneading the dough, hands shaking, as if trying to knead the fear out of her heart. Outside, the wind rose. Its whistle through the planks sounded like the earth's sigh. Silas brushed hair from the woman's forehead. Her eyelids twitched. Just a little. But enough to make his heartbeat stutter. She was waking. And he didn't know if that was a blessing or a threat. Night fell like a thick blanket. Eli, their 8-year-old son, slept soundly in his small bed, clutching a wooden dog Silas had carved for him. Clara drifted off after listening to her father whisper old stories in a voice like the prairie wind. But Silas didn't sleep. He sat alone at the table, lit a cigarette, and watched the oil lamp flicker like the soul of a lost traveler. Who was she? Why was she wounded in the wilderness? Who had fired the shot? Why was she unarmed, carrying only a bone amulet? The questions buzzed like night insects, unshowable. He remembered Margaret once said, the day they first moved in, people can learn each other's language, but to understand, they must learn each other's wounds. This Apache girl now lying in his wife's bed, in his house, in his life, brought a wound perhaps deeper than the one on her belly. And if he truly meant to save her, he had to be ready to receive that wound too. A soft moan. Silas rose instantly. She shifted, clutching the edge of the blanket, her lips parting as if to speak. Her eyes stayed shut. But in the way her head barely shook, in the faint sound from her throat, he felt a sorrow deeper than words. He stood motionless, hands at his sides. Didn't touch her. Didn't call her. Just sat beside the bed, letting his gaze guard her sleep like she was the last unbroken thing left in the world. As the oil lamp dimmed, darkness swallowed the house. But somewhere in that darkness, a different flame had been lit. Not from fire. Not from moonlight. But from the moment a man chose compassion over prejudice. And in Buddhist teaching, that is the first thought of a bodhisattva's heart. When compassion arises, karma begins to shift. Not all wars begin with guns. Not all forgiveness starts with words. Some battles are silent, fought in the space between two glances that share no language. Some kindness begins with a single wet cloth placed on a stranger's burning forehead. The next morning, sunlight pierced through gaps in the wooden walls, landing on the white bandage around the Apache woman's belly. She awoke. Not all at once. It was a slow rebirth, one breath, one twitch, one heartbeat at a time. First her eyelids fluttered. Then her cracked lips parted. Her hand gripped the blanket. Then came the groan like wind slicing through rock, small, sharp, and cutting deep into the soul. Silas sat at the table, sharpening his small bark knife. The sound of metal stopped when he heard it. He turned. They locked eyes. She didn't scream. Didn't cry. Just looked at him, wild like a wounded animal ready to bite. Her hand touched her wound, wincing. But what stunned Silas was her gaze, cold, half fearful, half proud. It was not a weak gaze. No screaming. No questions. No blame. Just one thing, silence. Silas slowly stood and walked toward her. He raised both hands, palms open toward her, silently saying, "I carry no weapon." 1 arm's length from the bed, he stopped. "No closer." She stared, shoulders tense, her eyes fixed like arrows. "It's all right," Silas said gently. "I'm only going to change the bandage." Of course she didn't understand English. But something in his voice, calm, slow, like the lullaby of earth, stopped her from bolting or yelling. He knelt, opened the cloth bag by the bed, pulled out a clean wrap and fresh herbs. As he gently touched the edge of her wound, she instinctively pushed his hand away, but not with a slap. Just a weak shove, like a bird still clinging to its last instinct to survive. "All right," he murmured, withdrawing, giving her space. She watched him. Long. Then, slowly, she glanced at the blood-stained bandage, inhaled deeply, and making a painfully difficult choice relaxed her shoulders, pulling her shirt aside to reveal the wound. Silas didn't speak. Didn't thank her. Didn't smile. He just bowed slightly, a silent promise, "I won't hurt you." He removed the old wrap, his hands steady despite the sweat on his brow. The wound was swollen but not pus-filled, a good sign. As he applied the herbs and tied on the new cloth, she didn't groan. Just closed her eyes. Her skin burned hot, but perhaps, the fire within burned stronger. Clara walked in, carrying a wooden cup of boiled water. The Apache woman turned, met the girl's eyes. Eye to eye. For a moment, time stopped. "Want some water?" Clara asked, voice young but eyes determined. The woman didn't answer. Clara didn't flinch. She placed the cup beside the bed and sat quietly on the floor. A few seconds passed. The woman, her name, as Silas would later learn, was Tayén, reached out, took the cup, and sipped carefully. A droplet slid down her chin, landing on the wrist holding the bone amulet. Clara smiled. A child's smile, free of borders, free of judgment. From a distance, Silas watched. Something tightened in his chest. Not worry. Not doubt. Maybe hope. A feeling he hadn't dared touch in years. That night, the three gathered near the oil lamp. Tayén slept, but not peacefully. She dreamed. Sweat soaked her bandage. She murmured in a language no one in the house could understand. Silas listened to the strange syllables, disjointed. But as a man who'd heard dying comrades call for their mothers in southern accents, he knew, you don't need to understand the words to understand pain. What she spoke wasn't language. It was prayer. It was repentance. It might even have been farewell. He rose, took his hunting rifle from the wall, unloaded it, placed it on the high shelf, out of the children's reach. Then, like a silent thou, he took his hunting knife and laid it on the stone at the doorway. A message that needed no translation: there will be no war here. When he turned back, Tayén's eyes were open. They looked at each other again. But this time, there was no fire. Only ashes. And ashes, if stirred the right way, can burn once more. That night, 2 flames burned in the same house, one in the hearth, one in the heart. They said nothing. But from that moment, something had begun. Something beyond words. Beyond skin, beyond language, beyond hate. Something that, in Buddhism, is called profound empathy, the ability to see with the heart. Have you ever quietly observed someone trying to learn your language not through books, but with their eyes, their heart, and every small gesture in a warm kitchen? That's no longer learning. That's connection. And inside Silas Whitmore's small home, an unspoken connection was beginning to take root. That morning began with something no one expected. Tayén stepped out onto the porch. No one called her. No one helped her. Just the creak of a hinge and her frail figure wrapped in an earth-colored blanket standing at the threshold, letting the early breeze tousle her hair, letting the sunlight brush her pale cheek. Silas was splitting wood along the side of the house. He paused at the sound of the door. He turned, as if to say something, but didn't. Tayén just stood there. Silent. Unmoving. Her gaze fixed on the low rolling hills in the distance, where dry bushes reached for the sun like old hands still trying to find warmth at the end of a long day. Clara broke the silence. She walked up, holding a wooden cup filled with water. Water, she said clearly, extending her hand. Drink. Tayén looked at the girl. A long, deep look, not rushed. Then she accepted the cup, pressed her lips together, and slowly, awkwardly like someone tasting honey for the first time said, "Tur." Clara laughed. A pure laugh that rang out like beads falling onto dry earth. Silas heard it, and somehow, the grip he had on his axe loosened. It was the first time laughter had filled the house since Margaret died. From that day forward, life in the house began to change. Not in dramatic ways, but through the smallest details, like the way Tayén quietly folded the blanket she slept with, how she gently washed her wooden bowl after eating, or how she observed Clara and Eli with silent attentiveness, as if relearning how to live among people. Silas noticed. Though he never said a word. He saw how she bowed her head at the table, placing a hand over her heart before taking the first bite, a sacred ritual he didn't understand. But he respected it. One dry afternoon, while Eli jumped from the porch into tufts of grass, Silas saw Tayén sitting alone under the eucalyptus tree. She held a small twig in her hand, drawing circles in the dirt. He walked over quietly and knelt beside her. "What are you drawing?" he asked, knowing she wouldn't understand. But she answered not with words. Tayén pointed to the circle, then to the sky. She drew a spiral beside it, then pointed toward the field. Then she placed her hand over her heart. Silas said nothing. Then, almost instinctively, he picked up a pebble and redrew the same symbol, this time adding a sun. Tayén looked at him. Her eyes glimmered with something different. Not quite gratitude. Not quite friendship. But the light of someone who had just realized, I am no longer alone. That evening, as the family sat around the fire, Silas did something he never thought he would. He pulled out an old notebook and a piece of charcoal. He wrote, "Silas." Then drew a figure wearing a hat. He pointed to himself. Silas. Tayén watched, then nodded gently. After a moment, she reached for the charcoal and drew a figure with long hair. Then, in crooked letters, she wrote, Tayén. Silas looked. Repeated the name. Tayén. She nodded. In a home where all language had been clumsy and uncertain, two people had finally managed to say something to each other. And even if it was just a name, a single word, it was enough to make both their hearts tighten. In the days that followed, Tayén began to blend into the life of the household as if it were natural. She didn't speak much. But she listened. She watched. She learned. She followed every motion of Silas splitting wood, every syllable Clara sounded out, every tremble Eli made when afraid of the dark. Then one day, Clara brought out a handmade fabric doll with Luz stitched across its chest, meaning light, and placed it in Tayén's hands. Tayén spoke her first full English word, however crooked. Luz. Clara burst out laughing and ran up to hug her tightly. And from a distance, Silas felt something invisible grip his chest. For the first time in years, he cried. Not because he lost, but because he gained. Every person has a moment that changes everything, and it rarely comes with fanfare or thunder, but as quietly as a leaf touching the earth. For Tayén, that moment arrived when she saw the silhouettes of horses cresting the hill, shrouded in mist like ghosts from a memory she had long tried to flee. A gray morning. Mist like silk draped across the treetops. Silas was mending the chicken coop roof. Clara was chalking pictures on the porch. And Tayén stood quietly near the wild mint patch, a shawl draped over her shoulders, the loose doll tucked under her arm like a small talisman warding off the darkness inside. Then Clara's scream cut through the stillness. Daddy! Look! On the hill! Silas looked up. Tayén spun around. Figures on horseback. Silent. In a long line like a painting from the past bursting into reality. Fur cloaks. Feathers in their hair. Spears and bows on their backs. Expressionless faces, but eyes blazing like they were testing the ground beneath their feet. Apaches. 20 of them. A silent encirclement forming. Silas instinctively stepped in front of his children, his hand reaching for the rifle but stopped. Tayén had already stepped ahead. She walked into the open yard. Her heart trembled, but her eyes did not. She raised her hand, palm forward, a gesture of peace as old as language itself. From the group, one man dismounted. An elder, dignified, with long braided hair resting on his chest, a cloak draped over his shoulders. His footsteps made no sound, as if the earth itself made way for him. As he neared, Tayén knelt. Her eyes brimmed with tears. Her voice cracked. One word slipped from her lips. Atai. Father. Silas stood silent. Clara clung to his hand, uncertain. No one spoke. Only the wind moved, ruffling grass and hair, witnesses to a moment in history on a wooden porch in the heart of Arizona. The meeting of two worlds did not begin with weapons, but with eyes. The father looked at the bandaged wound on his daughter's side. At the house that had kept her alive. Then at Silas. There were no shared words. No way to explain the days that had passed. But Tayén stepped forward and pointed at the field, the bed, Clara, the bread on the table. Then placed a hand over her heart. I lived. Because of them. A young warrior in the group, likely her brother, glared at Silas, his stare like it could turn him to ash. But Tayén spoke softly. Tashi. His name. Her brother. She pointed to the wound, then to Silas, and nodded. As if to say, without this man, I would be dead. No one replied. But oddly enough, no one drew a blade. Her father nodded. A silent acceptance of truth. The Apaches didn't leave. They stayed. Set up camp under the trees, quiet as shadows. Tayén became the bridge, translating not through words, but with hands, expressions, and a heart torn between two worlds. Clara, young but bold, stepped forward and split a piece of bread, handing it to Tayén. Tayén shared it with her father. It was silent bread but carried more meaning than any scripture. The old man nodded, placed his hand over his chest. Silas understood. No words needed. And in that golden light of dusk, for the first time in his life, he accepted that something sacred could exist beyond reason. Not God. Not law. But understanding. Yet, in the first light of trust, the shadows began to move. Not far away, in a smoke-filled saloon where whispers held more weight than bullets, a young man, the deputy sheriff's aide, listened closely to a rumor. That widower Silas took in a damn redskin woman. Another man sneered. Even lets his daughter play with her. Laughter followed. But behind the jokes was a sharp glint in someone's eye, a glint belonging to a man already crafting a plan that not everyone would escape. There are nights without a moon. Without stars. Just a vague, sinking feeling that something is about to collapse. Silas Whitmore's house, which had withstood storms and fire seasons, had never trembled like it did that night, a night when no gunshot was heard, but the smell of gunpowder crept in through every crack in the walls. From a hill behind the village, a group of 3 men on horseback moved silently through the trees. The fire in their eyes didn't come from torches but from hatred. One of them had seen Tayén from a distance before, a man harboring a venomous malice hidden under the guise of order. A man who looked at dark hair and saw a threat to white power. One night is all it takes, he muttered. And that redskin nest will burn to ashes. He clutched a bottle of oil tightly, his bony fingers gripping its neck like he was choking a bird about to die. Inside the house, where a warm fire crackled by the hearth, Tayén was speaking, helped by her cousin Swa, who had arrived from the eastern camp, about why she had been found alone on the hillside 3 weeks ago. We wanted peace talks, she said, voice trembling but clear. Some young men from my village hot-headed didn't believe in peace. I tried to stop them. Her story paused there, but Silas's eyes understood the rest. She had been betrayed by those she trusted. Left behind. Fallen. And he had found her while her wound was still bleeding. Clara, sitting by the fireplace arranging wooden puzzles, looked up. Mom always said the bravest person is the one who chooses to save, not to fight. Silence filled the room. Tayén looked at the little girl, her eyes glistening. She wasn't Clara's mother, no blood ties, no legal papers, but she had taught Clara how to wipe someone else's tears. And Clara had taught her how to forgive herself. Outside, a branch snapped in the dark. Silas jumped to his feet, grabbing his old rifle. Tayén held his hand. No, she said. Be afraid, but don't tremble. He looked at her, still clutching the rifle, but didn't step outside right away. They lit more lamps. Light made everything clearer. She stood in front of Clara and Eli. Silas stood behind them, like a worn shadow, unshakable. Then a loud crash. The window shattered. A glass bottle clinked across the floor with a sharp hiss. Firelight danced in their eyes. Clara screamed. Silas kicked open the door. Outside, flames had already swallowed the chicken coop. Shadowy figures ran toward the woods. He raised the gun. The trigger was ready. His finger pulled. But Tayén stepped in front of the barrel. "No," she said. "Don't chase. No more blood. They tried to kill you," he shouted. "And I want to live," she replied. "To truly live, not just breathe. To live without revenge." They fought the fire all night. Neighbors came, both white settlers and Apache. Tayén poured water, Silas shoveled dirt, Clara carried buckets like a tiny warrior. By sunrise, all that remained was wet ash. No one died. No one was injured. But more importantly, not a single bullet was fired. And maybe, just maybe, a door inside each person had opened. That night, Silas sat on the porch, exhaling deeply. Tayén sat beside him, silent. In her hand was a stone talisman, the one he had once dismissed as savage superstition. "My father made this for me when I turned 10, she said softly. "He told me, when you don't know what to say, wear this, and be silent with a clean heart." Silas nodded. "I used to think every wound had to be healed with a gun. But now, I see some only need stillness and listening." She placed the talisman into his hand. "Don't give it back," she said. "This needs someone to hold it for me, in case I forget how to believe in peace." The next morning, a group of native horsemen came to the Whitmore house. Not in anger but in respect. They had heard of the arson attack, and for the first time, two peoples once bound by blood-soaked memories, shared the same water bowl, broke bread together. One young warrior stepped in front of Silas, placed an eagle feather in his hand, and nodded. "We see," he said, in simple English. "You are a man who stops before everything dies." Silas didn't know how to respond. He simply tightened his grip around the feather and for the first time, understood, the greatest courage is knowing when not to strike back. How do you know someone has become essential to your life? Is it when you dream of them without trying? Or when their silence feels like a quiet prayer wrapped around your soul? For Clara, it happened the morning she unknowingly called Tayén by a name she had never spoken to anyone since her mother passed. Mom. No one taught Clara that. No one told her to say it. It just happened on a morning when the sunlight slipped through the curtain, and she woke up from a bad dream, hair messy, eyes moist, looking around, not seeing Silas, not seeing Eli. Just Tayén, sitting by the window, mending Eli's old shirt. Clara ran to her, wrapped her arms around her waist. Mom. I had a dream there was a wolf chasing me. Tayén froze. The needle slipped from her fingers. Her breath caught in her chest. But Clara's tiny arms only tightened, as if holding on to something she was afraid would disappear. But I woke up. Because I heard you singing to me. Mama Tayén. The whole room fell silent. Tayén couldn't speak. She had once been a child herself, holding her own mother during the first frost, hearing gunfire echo from across the mountain. She had been the older sister who comforted her brother with stories of eagle spirits while their father went to war. She had been the bravest woman in her village when she chose peace. But never had anyone called her mama. She bent down, buried her face in Clara's tangled hair, and cried silently. From that day on, the name Mama Tayén began to spread. First from Clara. Then Eli. Then the other village children who came to learn about herbs, how to tell wormwood from poison leaves, how to boil fever remedies. They called her that naturally without needing permission. Even Silas heard it for the first time, from a blonde-haired child who called her Mother of the Herbs. He stood in the garden, hoe in hand, and his heart skipped a beat. But not everyone accepted so easily. That evening, from a distance, a figure appeared on horseback. It was Reverend Blake, the man who had once arrived with eyes full of judgment and words sharp as saw blades. This time, he didn't come alone. He brought a letter, stamped with the seal of the Border Church Council. An official statement, brief, but cold as stone buried in the heart. The presence of a native woman residing and instructing children within church-governed territory is deemed inappropriate. Expulsion is required. Silas held the letter, saying nothing. Tayén stood behind him, quiet as the fading daylight. Clara, overhearing part of it, rushed out and stood between the Reverend and Tayén. "No. This is my mother's home." The Reverend bent down, voice low with false sympathy. "Child, your mother is not legal." But before he could finish, Clara shouted, "So what if she's not legal? She cured me when I had a fever. She bandaged Eli's hand when he fell. She sings me to sleep. She knows every plant in the forest, and what do you know? Have you ever lived here? Cooked for us." Everyone went quiet. The Reverend turned red. Silent for a long moment. Then he turned and left. Silas called after him, voice not loud but echoing like stones tumbling through a canyon. "If you return again with your laws, bring also the law of the heart. Around here, we live by what we do, not by skin or paper." That night, no one ate much. Tayén sat alone on the porch, the stone charm still around her neck. Silas brought a cup of tea. Said nothing. Sat beside her, as he always did. After a while, he spoke. "If one day, you had to leave, what would you take with you?" Tayén looked at him. The moonlight made her face seem as clear as spring water. She didn't answer right away. Then whispered, "I would take the name I never had, until the day Clara gave it to me." Silas nodded gently. "Then wherever you go, that name stays here with her, with me." At that very moment, the sound of hoofbeats approached. But this time it wasn't danger. It was her father Aguilaroja riding in, bringing a message from the tribe. "We wish to try again. Real peace, between blood and land." Tayén couldn't hold back her tears. Not because she was happy, but because finally what she had fought for was no longer a sacrifice without meaning. Have you ever stood at a crossroads, knowing that one path holds your blood, and the other your heart, and you simply cannot split yourself in two? For Tayén, that choice came like an axe striking a tree root, deep, final, and leaving a scar that would never fade. One dusky afternoon beneath the chestnut trees on the edge of Agua Clara, Tayén knelt before her father Aguilaroja. There was no fear, no hesitation in her posture now, only a silent burden carried in the heart. The old man sat before her, long braided hair resting on his blanket cloak, hands placed on a staff etched with sacred fire symbols. Behind him stood a group of elders and young warriors, including Tashi, her brother, his eyes still as hard as mountain stone. "We need you," her father said. "In the village. In the bloodline. What you've done here could be misunderstood." Tashi spoke next, his gaze sparking with heat. "Misunderstood? Or betrayal? The daughter of a warrior chooses to live with the man whose people stole our land." No one moved. Tayén bowed her head, her shoulders trembling slightly. Then she looked up. Met Tashi's eyes. No tears. No rage. "Do you know, it was Clara who taught me to forgive. That not everyone born from the conquerors is an enemy." Tashi let out a bitter laugh. But it wasn't strong. It was the sound of someone losing not to words, but to reality. I live here. But I haven't forgotten who left me in Silas's hands. It wasn't white men. It was our own. Her words hit like a backward-fired arrow. Silence followed. The tribal council lasted until nightfall. A fire burned in the center. Wind rustled through the trees. Few spoke. They watched each other. Watched Tayén. Watched the baby sleeping in Swa's arms, the daughter of a mixed-race woman from Agua Clara. The first child of both bloodlines accepted by both sides. A living symbol. A future that could not be undone. At last, Aguila Roja spoke in Apache, his voice hoarse like stone, breaking silence after ages. We don't choose where we're born. But we can choose where to lay down our bones. If you choose this place to live, then I choose it to die. He planted his staff deep into the ground. This is my final permission. You need not return to the village. But if ever you're cast out from here, the village will take you back. Tayén broke into tears. For the first time since she was abandoned, she was granted something that seemed small but was everything. The right not to have to choose. The next day, the entire village of Agua Clara gathered at the fork of the river. On the other side of the hill stood the Apache camp. Two lines of people faced each other. No swords. No spears. Only eyes. In the middle of the clearing, a child Swa's daughter crawled out of her mother's arms and toddled toward the stream. No one stopped her. She paused at the center, picked up a round stone, and held it to the sky. An Apache warrior pulled a red cloth from his pocket and tied it to the child's wrist. A woman from Agua Clara removed her seashell necklace and fastened it to the other. No one gave an order. But both sides nodded. No applause. No trumpets. Just wind. And in that wind, a new name was born. Tayén Bridge-keeper. That night, by warm firelight, Silas asked her, if one day, you had to leave, would you regret staying? She didn't answer right away. Then she held his hand, squeezed gently, and whispered, no. Because wherever I'm called mother, that's home. Some stories are not written with ink. Not told in words. They are hummed around the fire, carried in the breath of the earth, seen in the eyes of a child speaking their first word. Agua Clara had begun to change. Not by building walls but when former enemies planted corn together. Not through treaties but with afternoons echoing with children's laughter across the fields. And at the center of that transformation, was Tayén. After the day of unity between the village and the Apache tribe, Tayén was invited to officially teach at the little school she once dared only watch from the outside. In that room with earthen walls and rough wooden desks now hung a blackboard with words scribbled in 3 languages. Learn to understand. Understand to live. Silas built the frame. Clara cleaned the board. Eli drew a charcoal mural on the wall, Tayén standing between 2 riverbanks, arms outstretched as children ran across. On the first day of class, something unexpected happened. The same white children once forbidden by their parents to speak with Tayén, were the first to raise their hands to pronounce thank you in Apache. Toda, they said in unison. Tayén stood there, unable to hold back her tears. Every day after school, Tayén taught the children to recognize healing herbs, how to breathe when afraid, how to listen to their hearts before they speak. People called it the wind's classroom because there were no boards, no books. Just hands touching hands, ears pressed to soil, and one simple lesson. Before you judge someone, look down, are they standing on sand or on stone? Then came an unusual day. A delegation from the neighboring town arrived. At the front was a well-dressed woman with a leather notebook and round glasses hanging from her collar. She introduced herself as a representative from the Border Education Office, here to evaluate the quality of this mixed heritage classroom. No one really understood what she meant. But Clara, now a sharp, bright 10-year-old, stepped forward, hands behind her back, bowed, and said, "Good afternoon, ma'am. We learn here so we don't have to hate anyone. Is that quality good enough?" The woman froze. Then laughed. A weary laugh, but not a mocking one. "I'll put that in the report," she said. "Never seen a classroom that makes wickedness feel so unwelcome." That night, the whole village gathered around the largest fire since Agua Clara was founded. They built a stage from tree branches, spread cloth, and hung oil lanterns all around. Not for a wedding. Not for a harvest. For one reason: to retell the story that had changed them. Tayén didn't want to go on stage. But Clara pulled her forward. "Tell it again, Mama, from the beginning. The moment I called you Mom." All eyes turned to her. From Silas. From Swa. From the elders. From the mud-streaked children. Tayén inhaled deeply. But instead of speaking, she sang a song in her native tongue. No one understood the words, but each beat soaked into their skin like the breeze of a memory washed clean. A song about a girl who fell in the forest and was lifted by kindness. About a little house where a heart was stitched back together. About children who spoke 3 languages, the language of the father, the language of the mother, and the language of compassion. At the end of the song, Silas stood, took her hand, and said nothing. But the whole village rose to their feet with him. A thunderous applause, not for the song, but for the singer. In that moment, Agua Clara was no longer just a place. It was a belief that if one person can change a village, then a village can change the world. When a place truly becomes home, it isn't built from wood or clay, it's built from forgiveness. And in any village born of love, even those who return in guilt may still hear the door creak open. That morning, before the sun climbed over the mountains, hoofbeats echoed at the northern gate of Agua Clara. Tayén was pouring morning tea. Clara was tying Eli's hair. Silas paused at the stove, heart tightening from reflex. The rider was Tashi. Her younger brother, the one who stood against her at the tribal divide, who mocked, scorned, and vanished like a shadow too proud for farewells. He wore a tattered leather cloak. His shoulders slumped. His eyes were ringed with fatigue. No spear. No bow. Just a leather satchel, and a bleeding wound on his left shoulder, seeping through the cloth. Tayén didn't ask questions. She simply signaled Eli to bring water. Clara stood beside her, holding her mother's hand. The girl wasn't afraid, but her eyes narrowed, watching closely. Tashi dismounted slowly, dropped to one knee. "I have nowhere left," he said, eyes fixed on the ground. "Father is gone. The village is gone. Everyone scattered. I came because no one else is left to say goodbye." Tayén stepped forward, placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've never known how to say sorry," she said. "But today, you don't have to. Because this bow is the first time you've truly knelt." He pulled a small item from his satchel, an old, blood-stained cloth embroidered with a black eagle feather. "From Father," he whispered. "He left it for you. Said, if the girl survives and never turns her back on anyone, she is the keeper of the path." Inside the wooden house, Tashi was treated. No one asked many questions. Those who had heard stories about him said nothing. Clara brought him a cloth. Eli helped bandage the wound with Tayén. Silas, though silent, served him the largest bowl of bean stew that day. Tashi sat, quietly eating. Tears fell into the bowl. No one laughed. No one mocked. Because perhaps, in every life, there is a time when we run from kindness only to realize that is where we were meant to return. That night, beneath the great oak tree where the first peace ceremony between the village and the tribe had taken place, Tashi stood in the center of a fire circle, surrounded by the villagers. "I once demanded my sister be exiled from the village," he said. "I once called her a traitor. But today, I beg you to let me learn again. To learn the way she has lived, not with spears, not with hate, but with roots." The circle fell silent. Then, from the crowd, an elderly Apache woman stepped forward, leaning on her cane. She placed a dried corn seed in his hand. "Even an old seed can still sprout," she said, "if the one who plants it is willing to wait." Tashi stayed. Not in Tayén's home but in a small tent on the edge of the forest to start over. He learned how to say thank you, how to make a patient's bed, how to nod humbly when a child questioned him. He bowed every morning as he passed the village well where Clara had taught her students their first written words. And one day, it was Tashi, the one who once drew a spear, who shielded Clara from a rattlesnake, ignoring the bite on his arm. Tayén came running, tears in her eyes. Tashi smiled his first smile with nothing to hide. "You taught others how to save. Now it's my turn to learn how to protect what's worth living for." That evening, Silas placed a heavy hand on Tashi's shoulder. "You once asked me why I didn't shoot the man who burned down the chicken coop." Tashi nodded. "I haven't forgotten. Because if I had fired that night, Clara would have grown up without a father who knew how to forgive." Tashi looked down. "And now, she's growing up with an uncle who knows it too." Have you ever stood beside an old fire pit, seeing the ashes of old pain and wondered, can the past be warmed, instead of burning everything away? Agua Clara had lived in peace for 3 moons since Tashi's return. The village grew not in buildings, but in trust. White settlers and natives no longer stared with suspicion, but nodded as they worked side by side in the same field. But when peace lasts too long, the things we forget often find a way back. One summer afternoon, as the wind carried the dry scent of straw and dust, a child came running into Tayén's classroom, pale and breathless. "Smoke, to the west. Near the pine woods." Immediately, the warning bell made from a dried cowbell hanging on a wooden post rang 3 times. Villagers poured out. Silas grabbed his axe. Tashi slung on his water pack. Clara clutched Eli, instructing him to stay home with the elders. Tayén arrived, squinting against the harsh sunlight. A thin plume of smoke rose from the forest's edge like a slender wound on the face of the sun. "Not a big fire," Silas said, "but if it spreads, the wind could carry it to the medicine camp." "The place with all the rare roots and bark," Tayén murmured. "If we lose that, we lose our memory." The villagers split into teams, one to shovel earth, the other to cut wet branches for a fire break. Tayén ran ahead, leading the way. Every step she took retraced the path where Silas once carried her when her side still bled and fear beat wildly in her chest. Now, she was the one guiding others. When they arrived, the sight stopped everyone cold. The small healer's hut, keeper of years of learning from both cultures, was smoldering. No one saw who lit it. No one caught the culprit. Only one clue remained, a half-burned note pinned to a wooden stake. Tayén picked it up and read in silence. This place is not for the impure. The news spread quickly through the village. Clara burst into tears. Eli slammed the table. Why? We all learned from there. Silas stood in silence. But Tashi did not. He stepped forward, took Tayén's hand. Let me find them. The writer might be one of the extremist groups from the town. Tayén looked at him. You were just forgiven. Don't rush back into hate. Tashi shook his head. Not out of hate. But because for the first time you've taught me to protect what deserves to live. Tashi left the village. Alone. Tayén sent him with a small bundle, not a knife, not medicine, but a pouch of earth from the burned medicine camp. So you remember, she said, we don't fight for fire. We fight for the sprouts that still rise from ash. 3 days later, Tashi returned. No blood. No one tied up. Just a young man, trembling, eyes lowered. He had lived on the edge of town, his father injured long ago in a conflict with the Apache. He told me, Tashi said, hate was the only thing keeping him alive. What did you do? Tayén asked. Tashi opened the pouch, and poured the scorched earth into the man's hand. Told him, if he wants to live, he should plant something with his own hands. No one said a word. But a week later, when the villagers returned to clear the ruins of the medicine hut, something extraordinary had happened. From the blackened soil, a single green sprout had emerged. Fragile. Trembling. But real. Clara knelt down and whispered. She wants to live again. Tayén gently squeezed her daughter's hand. No, sweetheart. That's not her. That's all of us. That night, in the village square, everyone lit a fire, not to fight the old flames, but to welcome a new one, a community torch, sparked from the ashes of the medicine camp. They passed the flame from hand to hand. No fear. No anger. And from the crowd, Silas stepped forward, placing his hand on Tayén's shoulder. We didn't build this village so we'd never be hurt. We built it, so that if it burned, we'd know exactly where to begin again. Have you ever seen someone carry the weight of their wounds, and still bow their head to apologize? Not because they were wrong, but because they didn't want to hurt anyone else ever again. The first rain after the long drought fell over Agua Clara like a blessing. Cracked mud roofs, fading corn rows, and even weary hearts finally exhaled in relief. All except one. Tayén. Since the fire at the medicine hut, though the flames had been put out and new plants had grown, something inside Tayén remained unsettled. She often sat alone by the stream, holding a small notebook written in 3 languages, her native tongue, broken English, and Spanish learned from Clara. Silas noticed. But he didn't ask. Until one night. By the hearth fire, after dinner, when only the quiet glow of fireflies danced with every breath, Silas spoke. There's something you're not saying, but I feel it. Tayén froze. Her hands twisted together. Eyes fixed on the dying embers. I was wrong, she said. About what? About thinking that love alone would be enough. I thought, if I lived rightly, opened my heart, shared what I knew, no one would hate anymore. Her voice broke. But the fire still burns. People still hate. I'm tired, Silas. Tired of always having to prove I'm not the invader. Silas stayed quiet for a long time. Then he moved beside her and pulled something from his pocket. A half-burned handkerchief from the medicine hut stitched anew by Clara, with one simple line. You don't have to prove anything, Mama. You're the reason I believe in the world." Tayén wept. Not a scream. Not a collapse. Just soft sobs like a final drop falling onto dry stone, cracking it open just enough for a new seed to sprout. Silas wrapped his arms around her. And they sat like that, wordless, in the hush of falling rain outside. A rain not loud, but persistent. Like the quiet rebirth of a heart. The next morning, Tayén entered the classroom with an unwashed face, uncombed hair, but somehow, her voice carried stronger than ever. "Children," she said to the small circle seated before her, "today we learn one word: sadness is not wrong." One child asked, "Does that mean good people are never sad?" Tayén shook her head. "No. Good people often feel more sadness, because they can't respond with anger. But that's also what makes them stronger." That afternoon, something unexpected happened. Elder women from the Apache tribe, those who once watched Tayén in silence from afar, came to her door. What did they bring? Not gifts. Not rituals. Just stories. "We were hated once too," one said. "But we never told anyone. Today, seeing you stand and not run, we know it's time to open our hearts." That night, by the fire in the yard, a storytelling circle formed for the first time since the village began. It wasn't just Tayén speaking. Not just the children asking questions. But those who had never believed they had a right to speak were finally being heard. A blind old man told of the last battle, where he lost 2 brothers. A widow spoke of giving birth in the fog, with only wolves for company. Tayén held her infant daughter, her child with Silas, now a year old, and whispered, "You'll grow up never needing to prove anything. Just living kindly will be enough." From behind them, Silas murmured, "You don't need to be stronger anymore. You just need to be allowed to be soft when it's safe." And for the first time, Tayén allowed herself to be soft in the arms of people who didn't need her to save them, but would gladly save her, if she ever needed it. Have you ever believed that someone who leaves never truly disappears, but simply steps back so that their final words can arrive when they're most needed? Agua Clara was entering winter. The morning fog hung thick as milk, clinging to tree trunks and golden corn racks. In the sound of migrating birds, in the whispering wind through roof cracks, something felt like a message, like someone had waited long enough to remind them of something sacred. That afternoon, Eli, now 10 years old, was digging a small hole behind the medicine camp, where green had begun to return. He found an old wooden box, bound with frayed rope. He called for Tayén and Silas. They opened it together, and inside were yellowed pages, handwritten in sharp slanted script. Margaret's handwriting, Silas's first wife. Gone long before the story began. Silas picked one up, frozen as if he'd touched a grief long thought dried. Tayén rested a hand on his shoulder. "I didn't know you kept these." "I didn't," Silas whispered. "She left them here." Inside the bundle were letters to Clara, to Eli, and to the woman she'd never met. The final letter was short. The envelope read, "To the one after me, if he's lucky enough to love again." Silas's hands trembled as he read. "If he loves you, then you are the right one. If he is silent when he sees you cry, it's because there are no words big enough to comfort you. He is a man of many faults, but never lacking in love. And if you stay, please forgive him for loving you like a man still learning how to begin again. M." Tayén didn't cry. Not because she wasn't moved, but because, in the twilight haze, she saw Margaret sitting there, behind Silas, smiling. Not jealous. Not bitter. but like an old friend handing over the key to a house she no longer lived in but still hoped would be filled with laughter. That night, after Clara had fallen asleep, Eli curled beside his baby sister, and Tayén sat alone on the porch steps. Silas came out, blanket in hand, and draped it over her shoulders. "Are you angry that I still carry part of her with me?" Tayén smiled. "No. Because if you had never loved someone like that, I wouldn't believe the love you have for me is real." Silas took her hand. Squeezed it. "I once thought I didn't deserve to love again, until you showed me that love isn't a privilege. It's the duty of those still living." The next morning, Tayén brought the letters to school. She didn't lecture as usual. She read one aloud, Margaret's letter to Clara. When she finished, she said, "She didn't teach her daughter how to forget but how to keep going. And that is what we must learn today." That night, on the small altar in their home, Tayén placed an oil lamp carved from a pumpkin seed shell. She hung it beside Margaret's photo. Clara lit the lamp with her own hand. "Thank you, First Mother," she whispered. "I will never let this light go out." And outside that small wooden house, on a land once slashed by blood, fire, and hate, a flame that would never go out began lighting the path for the next generation. If there's one thing time can't teach us, it's how to leave at the right moment. But if there's one thing love can teach us, it's the reason to stay. Even if it hurts. Even if it means waiting. That winter came earlier than usual. Cold winds sliced through the straw roofs, making the children of Agua Clara curl deeper into thick layers of clothes. What was once just a stopover village was now a place with seasonal calendars, market days, and a remembrance ceremony. Tayén taught school, prepared medicine, and raised 3 children: Clara, Eli, and little Nahele, born exactly 1 year after the fire at the medicine hut. Silas farmed, made tables and chairs, still cooked awkwardly. But every time he burned a pen, he secretly taught the kids how to apologize to Mom the way Dad learned it. All seemed well. Until one day. Clara, now a young woman, returned home with a letter. She handed it to her mother. Tayén recognized the handwriting instantly: the provincial government. The letter said Agua Clara would no longer be recognized as an autonomous zone, citing risk of cultural disorder raised by other nearby settlements. They wrote, "Letting natives and immigrants live without boundaries is unscientific and prone to conflict." Silas, after reading, clenched his hand so tightly it turned pale. Tashi, long trusted as the village's quiet protector, spoke only once. "We don't need guns. But we do need presence." The very next day, the entire village did something unprecedented. They rewrote the full history of Agua Clara from the ground up. In 3 languages. Each person contributed. Tayén wrote the beginning. Silas wrote the middle, when the medicine hut rose from ash. Clara wrote the present, where children blended languages into magical songs. Eli drew illustrations. Nahele, still tiny, drew the sun. When the time came to present their record in the city, the whole village walked for 3 days. They carried nothing but a leather-bound book and a torch lit with forest herbs. At City Hall, they did not shout. They held no signs. They sat in the square, forming a circle, and began to tell their story. Tayén stood in the center. Her voice steady. Her eyes never lowered. "We are not demanding land. We are not seeking privilege. We only wish to preserve the life we've chosen with kindness." One council member, face unreadable, asked, "And if we refuse recognition?" Tayén smiled. "Then we'll still be there. Like roots. We don't need approval. We only need to keep living as the land has chosen us. When they left, there was no applause. No reassurances. Just one thing no one expected. A second letter arrived a week later. The council has reconsidered. Agua Clara will remain recognized as a pilot model for multicultural community harmony. That night, the village held a sacred fire gathering with no name. Not to celebrate, but to remind one another why they had chosen to stay. Silas sat in the circle, looking at Tayén, their children, Tashi, and the elder Apache women softly singing lullabies. He spoke. We haven't won anything. Because this was never a battle. We've simply kept what should never have been taken. Tayén turned to Clara. Are you afraid, knowing many outside still won't understand? Clara smiled. I'm not afraid. Because I was born in a village where my mother was the first to say, we don't need saving. We only need to be heard. And that night, amid the laughter, the children's cheers, and the crackle of burning wood, Agua Clara was no longer just a name. It was an answer. To those who've ever asked, can compassion ever build a place where one might stay, for life? Have you ever wondered? When someone has given enough, loved enough, lived enough, how do they leave? Quietly, gloriously, or perhaps, without even saying goodbye. That spring, Agua Clara turned 10. A village once just a flicker in the desert of doubt now had a school with 3 teachers. A natural medicine hut, Silas's wood workshop, and the annual Festival of Light, where people lit lanterns from the ashes of the old year to welcome the new. Nahele, now 6, ran barefoot through the sunflower field, waving a flag of 3 colors, red of the earth, white of milk, and green of life. The colors of the 3 peoples who built this place. Tayén still taught, but her hands trembled while writing. Silas still crafted furniture, but his back was more hunched than before. Clara, now lead teacher, led songs in 3 tongues. Eli, training as a healer, compiled old herbal wisdom into official texts. Nahele, forever the youngest, asked 30 questions a day about why love exists. One night, when the whole house was asleep, Tayén sat on the porch, an old notebook on her lap, firelight flickering. Silas sat beside her, silent. He placed a small paper in her hand, his writing shaky but clear. If one day you're tired, don't carry more. The kids and I are old enough to keep this flame alive. Tayén nodded, but didn't let go. Not yet. Until one morning, Nahele came into her mother's room, no answer. Clara rushed in. Eli followed. Silas stood at the door, clutching his worn cane. Tayén lay there. No farewell. Only a soft smile like the scent of dry wood. And a folded letter placed atop a dust-covered journal. In the letter, Tayén wrote, *I take nothing with me because all that is precious has already been left behind. My daughter Clara teaches from her heart, not just books. My son Eli heals with both hands and memory. My youngest Nahele keep asking questions. Each one is a piece of peace. And Silas, the only one who taught me that we don't have to be the same to stay together forever. If you remember me, don't build an altar. Light an oil lamp. And place it beneath the tree that once was ash. Because if the soul has a home, for me, that home is Agua Clara. *. There were no black veils at her funeral. No mourning horns. Just the entire village in earth-brown clothing, forming a circle around the old tree where the medicine hut once burned. Clara lit the lamp. Nahale placed a small stone on the root. Eli, choking back tears, read the last lines aloud. The firekeeper now rests. But don't be afraid. Because each of us one by one knows how to start it again. 3 months later, Tayén's name was carved into the village gate. Not as a saint, but as a mother who lived fully. Every year, on the day she passed, no one cried. Instead, they told stories, each person sharing one beautiful thing she did. Nahale grew up to follow her mother's path. Clara taught all her life. Eli became the healer of 3 surrounding villages. And Silas, with white hair and bent back, still walked the fields each morning, carrying a small oil lamp. As if the flame alone meant Tayén had never truly left. And Agua Clara? It still lives. Still loves. Still builds houses from wood but villages from memory. Not because Tayén once lived there, but because she never truly left. If you've walked this journey to the end, please leave a word not for us, but for Tayén. What would you say to someone who gave their whole life to preserve a place of kindness in this world?